Hello, my name is Desiree Clark, and I will be reading my informative speech on early Chinese immigrants' hardships. Um, Tens of thousands of Chinese immigrants traveled to the United States between the 1800s and the 1900s. And since they traveled so far and wide just to find a decent amount of work, they weren't there for like the gold rush. They weren't there just for the money. They were there to work, so they could bring their families over and all that. And the Chinese who made it over to the U.S. suffered through so much, such as the gold rush, working on the railroads, and dealing with Angel Island after all that. The Chinese came over to the U.S. in the 18th century for the California gold rush. They wanted to get money, and the only reason they wanted to get money was so they can come over, so they can bring their family over and start a family in the United States for freedom. The first Chinese immigrants were wealthy and successful, and because of that, the U.S. loved them because they weren't there for the gold, and they weren't there just to be there. They were there because they wanted to, like I said, to become to have money and to have their family come over and all that. They took other jobs such as like becoming fishermen and butchers and just basic jobs around that time. And but unfortunately, after a few years of that, the U.S. became negative and hostile because then after that, the Chinese started coming over and they weren't skillful, they weren't successful, they weren't even wealthy. They were kind of mooching off people, um, and because of that, violent acts struck out because the Chinese would work as they would work to they would work for cheaper jobs, and because of that, the U.S. citizens would become mad because they couldn't get jobs, but the Chinese had them, and and the threats got so worse to the point where like the employers couldn't even hire the Chinese because they were being threatened as well. So then after the gold rush happened, the Chinese kept coming over and they kept coming over and they wanted to do railroads, and because of the gold rush, railroads became more and more popular. About almost 95% of males agreed to lower paying wages than the other workers there because of the violent acts going around that time. And because of that, over 1,200 Chinese were pronounced dead because of the dangerous work conditions such as avalanches, earthquakes, and when it snowed, rock falls and all that. And then they would get paid $26 to $35 a month for working 12 hours for 6 days a week. And I'm really not sure how much the other workers got, but I'm pretty sure it was pretty much more than that. And then after that, once the railroad was complete, the violent acts just kept getting worse and worse for decades. It was always bad, but after the railroads and the gold rush, it just got worse and worse to the point where laws were passed against Chinese coming into the United States, and they had to actually make an act to stop the violence, and it just didn't work. But since the immigration laws were passed, Chinese immigrants had to prove that they were U.S. citizens of the United States around that time. They either had to prove that they had a husband or they had a father who was a citizen, or else they would be deported back to China. Men and women would be separated and detained, and then as many U.S. officials would ask very obscure questions such as about the Chinese villages and the family history that the Chinese people would have a hard time answering right away. And then immigrants would write their fears and frustrations by messages and poems, and that were either in writing or carved onto the walls, in which some of them you can still see at the museum that they had built there. When word got out to China, the Chinese people who would want to cross over would mentally prepare themselves and would study and would just really prepare themselves for the questions and for the hardships that would come, because it was just so bad about how bad that they were treated there. Because so many people know about Ellis Island and how easy it was, but in Angel Island, the Chinese were treated so poorly because of the violent acts going on throughout the whole decade. It just wasn't fair. But in 1940, a fire broke out and burnt down the building, and then years went by, and then they built a museum there, and they managed to keep some of the walls there and carvings that the immigrants would write. So overall, the early Chinese immigrant hardship was very bad between the gold rush in the 1800s all the way up to Angel Island in the 1900s. Violent acts were spread out to the point where there had to become laws. They would work for very low wages, and then it would just get worse and worse. So it just goes to show you how much you should respect somebody from where they come from or where their ancestors come from, because it's not fair. It's such a judgmental world these days, and it's not fair that you judge somebody just by their race or by their color or anything. So treat others the way you want to be treated and respect them. If you don't show respect, they won't give you respect. That's all I gotta say. Thank you.